Let's do it.
Good evening. Today's Tuesday, February 18th, and I call to order a meeting of the Brockton Finance Committee. Will everyone please rise and join me in honoring our country by saluting our flag.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Clerk, agenda item number 1, please.
Item 1, we have the acceptance of the minutes of the January 26, 2025 Finance Committee meeting.
Accepted and placed on file.
We have the acceptance of the minutes of the January 21st, 2025 Finance Committee meeting.
Accepted and placed on file.
We have the acceptance of the minutes of the February 3rd, 2025 Finance Committee meeting.
Accepted and placed on file.
Item number 4, ordered that the City Council authorizes the acceptance and expenditure of the total grant funds in the amount of $49,986 from the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security to the Brockton Fire Department. Invited Fire Chief Brian Nardelli, CFO Dr. Troy Clarkson.
Chief Nardelli, good evening.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Councilors. Thank you for having me. This is a grant that this is actually the final year. It sunsets this year. It's been for 5 years. We've accepted over the last few years grant funds. We've bought new meters, new thermal images. This year is different. We're actually buying an SCBA washing machine to wash the SCBAs, which I guess the interesting thing about this is it is a machine that was slated to be in the new building that we did not yet have funds for. So this actually worked out perfect. We've been doing a pretty good job. I've been working with my command staff, the mayor and Dr. Clarkson, over the last couple of years to try to buy stuff out of the operating budget that we'd be able to use in the upcoming public safety building to try to take some of that off the other side of the ledger, which has actually worked out very, very well so far. And this will be one of the crowning achievements of that, to buy this piece of equipment. Hopefully by the time we get it, we'll be able to slide it right in the building and we'll be open for business. So this is a non-matching grant. Like I said, this is the last year. We've been working to try to see if the governor is going to reestablish this grant for another 5 years, but we don't know as of yet.
Great.
Motion to recommend favorably back
Second.
to the full
Second.
City Council.
Motion.
Councilor Castro.
Thank you. Good evening, Chief. Nice
Good
to
evening.
see you. Well, because I wanted to ask, I read the documentation. There's no match.
No.
And it says you're going to use it for self-contained breathing apparatus and personal protection firefighter turnout gear.
So the machine that we're purchasing is approximately $39,000. It's not the self-contained breathing apparatus. It's a cleaning machine for that gets the carcinogens out of the turn. If you look at an SCBA that we wear on our backs, there's a lot of cloth that goes into it as well, the straps that go around it. That has to be cleaned. We usually scrub it with a brush. This actually completely desanitizes it, and in a machine you close up and vents out of the building. The other remaining funds we're going to use to buy a few extra sets of turnout gear to be able to purchase for members who we're always ripping it and tearing it. The stuff's, close to $3,900 now to buy one whole set of turnout gear.
How long do you expect that washer will last?
They're fairly new. This is something that's, I want to say, new technology. So I know some departments that have had them for 20 years. But that was, I don't know of anyone who's replaced them. Let me put it to you that way, because it's somewhat new technology. I think since the fire service and we started to see such rises in cancer, we try to wash everything. I never, when I was new on the job, and you didn't wash your gear that much. We didn't even have extractors. Now we have stuff to wash our gear. We have stuff to wash. Now we have stuff to wash the SCBA harnesses as well. So I don't know. I wish I could give you a better number on that. But I know people. I know departments who have had them in excess of 15 to 20 years. I don't know of anybody who's replaced them.
When you wash them in a washer like this,
Yep.
All the contaminants go down the drain?
They're filtered. The contaminants are filtered out and then disposed of.
Okay.
So it's almost like the sewage treatment plant in an extent with the sludge. Anything that is captured is captured. The water is cleaned and sent out through the drain and the carcinogen. But I'll be honest with you, the carcinogens that are in the extractors, there's not really any filters in those. That goes into the sewage like anything else. This actually does a better job of it.
Great. Thank you for your explanation.
Welcome. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Anyone else? Seeing none, A motion has been made and properly seconded to recommend this matter favorably. All in favor? Anyone opposed? It's recommended favorably.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, councilors.
Item number 5, ordered that the City Council authorizes the acceptance and expenditure of the total grant funds in the amount of $775,475.14 from the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security to the Brockton Police Department. Invited Police Chief Brenda Perez and/or her designee, CFO Dr. Troy Clarkson.
Good evening, Ms. Lopes. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Nice to see you again. Good evening, members of the council. So through the Shannon Grant, we're able to provide a multi-pronged approach to preventing firearms violence and youth gang involvement throughout the youth of Brockton. We partner with multiple organizations. This year, we'll partner up with 9 to provide wraparound services. Some of the services that are included, providing street outreach, case management, summer camperships, youth employment, and trauma-informed mentoring. This grant also supports our junior cadet and youth academy, which are run out of the Brockton Police Department. This grant does have a 25% match, which we will provide from the department as well as our partners through in-kind services. We did see an increase this year in funding of roughly $30,000, so we're grateful for that to continue this work throughout the city.
Thank you. Councilors, any questions? Seeing none,
Recommend favorably.
Second.
a motion has been made to recommend this matter favorably. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Matter is recommended favorably. Thank you, Ms. Lopes.
Thank you all.
Item number 6, ordered that the following named sum be and the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Transfer of $1,098,593 from certified free cash to opioid settlement fund. Invited Honorable Mayor Robert F. Sullivan, CFO Dr. Troy Clarkson.
Good evening, Dr. Clarkson. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, councilors. As you know, the mayor is enjoying school vacation week with his family, so I will gladly represent him and my office on this. As always, I sent you over the weekend a memo detailing all of the items on tonight's agenda. And I want to thank Councilor Nicastro. I have to look in the right place because now I got to get used to the new seating here. I was looking over here. So Councilor Nicastro sent a few questions. I will answer those as part of my narrative. Then, of course, I'm happy to answer any other questions that the council might have on this. We've been receiving these funds since fiscal year 2022. And we created, working with you, a revolving fund for this. During the course of the receipt of these funds, which many communities throughout the Commonwealth are receiving as part of an overall class action settlement, the guidance on how to handle these funds has evolved. So the way we've handled the funds has evolved. So they went into the fund that you created, and then based on guidance from the Commonwealth, a total of $1,098,593, which is the amount that's before you tonight, was actually processed into the general fund. And it was turned into free cash. The DOR then issued guidance that they wanted the money to actually go into the opioid revolving fund. So this item before you tonight simply asks you to take that money, which was part of certified free cash, and place it into the opioid fund. The current amount on hand in the fund is $840,260. This will supplement that. And the funds to date have been spent primarily, almost entirely, on supporting Gandara Mental Health Center, which was the contractor that operated the Champion Plan for several years. So there is, should this transfer be approved, there will be a substantial balance of nearly $2 million in the fund. When you created the fund, as you know, there were several parameters that you placed on that, but there's wide flexibility that can be used to address a variety of needs. So that is essentially the request before you. Our auditor, Irene Giannopoulos, is also here on hand should you have any questions for her, but that's essentially the basis of the request.
Thank you, Mr. Clarkson. Any questions?
Good job.
I just,
Motion to recommend favorable.
a second?
Second.
Just on the motion, Dr. Clarkson, so currently, we're no longer engaged with the Guardian Center for the Champion Plan.
Gandara, correct.
Okay. So I think, councilors, it could be helpful. I know I've been working with Jasmine Bradshare about what to do with these funds. It might be helpful for at one point to bring her before us on a resolve. There is discussion of establishing a committee that would then accept grants from nonprofits to establish different ideas, whether they be treatment or other types of services that these funds could be used for. And so I know she's working to establish that commission right now. So I think shortly we should file a resolve, bring her before us, talk about what the intended use of these funds would be.
If I may, on that point, I know the council president and I discussed that very issue recently, and we have a template for such a process here. As you might remember, early in the pandemic, with the receipt of some of the pandemic relief money, the mayor established a similar program, and we granted nearly $2 million to more than 40 different nonprofits. And so we have an established protocol and checks and balances in place, and $2 million is a lot of money that could go to very good use.
Right. Absolutely. Councilor Rodriguez.
On the motion, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Clarkson, since you brought it up, the $2 million that were actually given out through the CARES Act, we never got a final report of what was used with those funds. I mean, I know agencies, quite a few agencies in the community applied for these funds, but for some odd reason, it's like we never saw, what did we get for our $2 million? And I think I've asked, at least I brought that up, several times in a sense, and it would be nice to know exactly where some of these funds are ending up, and what exactly is it doing out in the community, because to be honest with you, a lot of us could have used those funds to do a variety of other things in the community, and for some odd reason, it was kind of divided equally among the participants, that some of us felt it was a little on the unfair side, because, you've got a mom and pop, not to pick on the churches, but you got a mom and pop church basically doing little work versus an agency like the YMCA in the sense, and they got the same amount of money, which I brought that up to you in terms of I thought that was not a fair process to do, because the doings of each one of these organizations, like for instance, the organization that I work for never applied for it, because we thought that it should have been put into more of let's go by the history of these organizations, some of the things that they're doing in terms of past experiences versus some inventive stuff that they were going through. I know that this isn't part of the order here that we're discussing, but I think it would be nice to at least get us some of the, if you have some of those reports of what was done with the taxpayers' $2 million that were given out to these agencies, it would be good to hear.
Sure. We actually purchased a software so that we could track specifically what each organization was doing with the funds, so we can put together a report, and happy to come back under a resolve and discuss that in detail. But I'll get that report to you, Councilor.
Right, but supposed to do versus what actually was done. Because that, to me, is the important thing, because they could have proposed a bunch of good stuff, and God knows what was done on the back end of it. So that's what we'd like to know.
Great point. And so what we did, just to remind the council, we provided the money to those nonprofits in tranches, and in order to get the subsequent payments, I think it was 4 payments. If it was a $50,000 grant, there were 4 payments of $12,500. In order to get the subsequent payments, they had to prove to us that they were doing what they said they would do with the money. So that's why I know we have pretty detailed accounting of what was done by each organization. So we'll put that together, and I'd love to come back and talk about it.
I appreciate it, Toy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Of course.
Thank you, Councilor. Anyone else? Motion has been made and properly seconded to recommend this matter favorably. All in favor? Anyone opposed? The matter is recommended favorably. Thank you,
Item-
Dr. Clarkson.
Item 7, that the following named sum be and the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Transfer of $8,106,226 from certified free cash to Chapter 324 supplemental reserve. Invited Honorable Mayor Robert F. Sullivan, CFO Dr. Troy Clarkson.
Mr. Clarkson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Chapter 324 Reserve Fund was set up under the Chapter 324 of the Acts of 1990, and so the city of Brockton, as you all know, every year has placed money into that fund, and the fund was created to provide support should there be some sort of fiscal challenge or emergency that required it. As you all very well know, we requested that we use that fund to help address the school deficit a couple of years ago. The requirements of the law remain, so what we've done the last couple of years, if you recall, we replenished the fund last year, and then as part of your vote to approve this year's fiscal year budget, we transferred the money out. This is an exercise required by the law to replenish that fund, but I do expect that as part of the process to balance next year's budget, when I'm before you in June, we'll ask you to yet again use these funds. This amount is different, slightly higher than the amount that you'll see in your budget book to balance this year's budget, because the law also has a built-in calculator that requires us to escalate the amount that we put into the fund every year. As part of a request to our legislative delegation to consider some changes that we've talked about to Chapter 324, including language that would make merging some operations with the schools easier, might change some of the requirements of the law. I have had a discussion with our legislative delegation about eliminating the need for this fund. Since the inception of this fund, as you know, this council has approved the creation of a separate stabilization fund, the one for our pension reserve, which currently has over $25 million in it. So the exercise to essentially take free cash and put it in this fund and then take it out is an exercise that keeps us in compliance with the law, but is not necessarily an exercise that we need to do. We just used free cash. So this is a requirement of both the law and the Department of Revenue, but I do anticipate using the entirety of the amount to balance next year's budget.
Councilors. Councilor Farrell.
And just for the sake of the public, then you will be back and we'll, after the free cash is certified for FY25, unless there is a legislative change, we're going to be putting money back into the account. So it's, I want people to understand that this is not a fail-safe mechanism, but for right now, it's a good way of having money set aside to help you balance each succeeding fiscal year's budget. And
Correct.
If there are changes, fine, but if not, we'll be back here doing it again, so.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks.
Anyone else? Councilor Minichiello.
Good evening, Mr. CFO.
Good evening.
How are we doing with regard to the receipts so far of the marijuana dispensaries?
So I did provide you over the weekend the general revenue report. Let me just check that for you. And we will discuss that in a little more detail later tonight. I'm grateful to have that resolved to discuss the budget in general, but I did.
You want to wait for the later on? I mean, is it more?
Yeah, why don't we do that?
It's fine.
Because it's a little out of scope, so we'll handle
fine.
that at the resolve.
To be continued.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Oh, that was it. Thank you.
I just have one question, if you don't mind. Mr. Clarkson, is there any penalty involved in removing this money and then completely and then putting it back? Do we incur any sort of fiscal penalty for doing so?
No, the details of the law do contemplate a penalty if we don't replenish it. And so that's actually why we go through this exercise, is to maintain compliance with the law, so that if we just didn't replenish the fund, there are provisions in the law that would then have a rolling calculator of additional funds that we would have to put back in.
Other than that uptick where you said it's statutorily every year it upticks, is there any interest that we're losing out on by removing these funds, or, you know, by not having it into that account? Are we losing any funds, or are we charged any interest, or?
No.
No.
And that, to elaborate on that just a bit, Mr. Chairman, that's why I think the fund was created back in 1990 when the city needed to be disciplined in making sure it had reserves. I think we've done a good job since then, certainly under my predecessor's tenure and during my time here. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, you know, we were able to fund that pension reserve fund with cash that we had on hand from the budget with the savings from the pension obligation bond. So I certainly don't think that the crafters of that law anticipated would be able to have a $25 million stabilization fund in the future.
Good. Is a motion made?
Motion to recommend favorably to the entire City Council.
Second.
That's the motion.
Motion is made, properly seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion is recommended favorably. Thank you, Dr. Clarkson.
Item 8, order that the following named sum be and the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Transfer of $50,000 from auditor full-time salaries to auditor postage. Invited City Auditor Irene Giannopoulos, CFO Dr. Troy Clarkson.
Dr. Clarkson.
Let me just give you a quick intro, then I'm happy to have, Irene, you can come on up. There's room at the lectern for both of us. I will give you a little preview of our discussion of the budget. I did provide you over the weekend an updated budget report, and that provides year-to-date spending as of the 13th of February for all of our departments. And as you can see, we are 62.47% through the year, and in auditing, their personal services line is at 41.4. So they're well below the projected amount of spending, and that's due to vacancies in the department that Irene can talk about. If you go to the next line in auditor mail, they're at 89% spent. And so there are several expenses related to postage, including last year's election, including hearings for public property and abutters lists that require additional funds. So we're requesting the money come from the auditing personal services to essentially keep it in the same department, but because those funds are readily available.
Good evening, Madam Auditor.
Good evening. I'm respectfully requesting from this honorable council a transfer from the auditor full-time salary line item, $50,000, to the auditor postage line item. Just to piggyback off of what our CFO just said, and I'll try to make this quick. We had several vacancies in my office, in particular since July. We had a vacancy for an admin 2, a payroll clerk, since mid-June, which we just filled in December, mid-December, so there's cost savings there. Additionally, I've been fulfilling the role of 2 positions myself, performing dual roles, and I'm happy to say that as of today, that will no longer be. I just hired an assistant auditor for the city of Brockton. I'm very excited about that. So there's cost savings there because of, you know, us having to sort of pick up the slack there. But when it comes to increase in postage costs, again, just to reiterate what Dr. Clarkson said, we did have a huge surge in postage for the mail-in ballots for the presidential election. Additionally, there were bulk mailings for things like the abutters mailings, various mailings when it came to the Council on Aging, but in particular, there was a census mailing that occurred the last time in 2020, that occurred now in 2025, and that was a huge postage cost. We also learned from our elections office that there was a population increase in the city since then of 6,000 residents. So all of that combined requires extra postage needed to get me through to the end of June. I welcome any further questions.
Councilors, any questions?
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second.
Motion has been made and properly seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion is recommended favorably.
Thank you.
Madam Auditor.
Item number 9, ordered that the following name sum be, and the same is hereby transferred, as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Transfer of $750,000 from DPW Highway Snow Removal, $500,000. DPW Highway Paving, $50,000. Finance full-time salaries, $100,000. Mayor Purchase of Services, $100,000. 2, Law Department Property Insurance, $650,000. 2, Law Department Court Judgments, $100,000. Invited DPW Commissioner Patrick Hill, CFO Troy Clarkson, City Solicitor Megan Bridges, and/or her designee.
Good evening, Dr. Clarkson. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Carlson.
I'll allow Solicitor Bridges to get into the detail with you on the need for the funds, although we've talked about it before. The costs of property and casualty insurance has risen significantly, and I know both the solicitor and I have discussed this fiscal year those costs with you. I can discuss the sources of the funds. Again, I would point you to the budget report. I know Commissioner Hill cannot be here tonight, but I did discuss this, and I believe he discussed it with you, Mr. President. This report also provides you with the detail on where we're at with the snow and ice, and although the weather the last several days has been nasty, Commissioner Hill is confident that there is more than sufficient funds for this transfer, and we do anticipate, so long as the rest of the year is as predicted, we still should finish up the year with a significant balance in the snow and ice. So given the minimal amount we've spent this year, I can speak comfortably for Commissioner Hill and agree that this is responsible for this transfer. The other amounts are due to vacancies that exist or unexpended funds that exist in those departments, including money from my budget that exists due to vacancies, and so we're comfortable that these amounts are available and appropriate to transfer, and I'll turn it over to the solicitor to discuss the specific needs.
Good evening, Madam Solicitor. How are you?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Did you have a specific question?
No, please, if you have something to say, please do so.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Clarkson, for that information. So most of you know this, but maybe you don't, and at the risk of maybe telling you something you know, I'll take it. The city is self-insured for general risk, slip and fall, person hurt at school, an arrest that leads to a civil claim. But we are insured for motor vehicles, and we have to be insured, that's the law. That includes the buses. We are, in our buildings are insured. And then we have other minimal policies. Cyber insurance, we have crime insurance. And my department also manages workers' comp, which is kind of, we're self-insured for workers' comp too. So what I'm asking you for your support in the transfer tonight, $650,000 is for our insurance program. So the cost of living has increased for everyone. This is not just something unique to my department. But significantly, the vehicle insurance increased a very high percentage on our last renewal cycle. And how those work with the city is we have a broker. Troy and I work together with the broker who works with getting us the best deal. I mean, that's sort of the brass tacks of it is, his name is Chris Shepard. He was with Eastern, now Gallagher. And for the most part, all our policies are through those folks who go out into the market and shop for us. Since the increase in the auto, we have started utilizing things, well, the police and fire do their own defensive driver techniques, but we're working with DPW, police and fire, and maybe the Parks Department on driver training and anything we can do to prevent accidents on the city side. And our loss ratio is coming down. But it got to a 5-year high that I inherited, and I mean, that's just what it is. My department doesn't drive vehicles. We just manage the policies. So the bulk of the money is for insurance. The $100,000 that I'm asking for court judgments, as you all know, you funded the line item at $1.5 million. 1.25 of that was for the Choi settlement, for someone who spent 16 years in prison and who was determined to be wrongfully convicted. The remaining $250,000 is the general amount you fund my budget for as long as I've been in charge of the budget. And we paid significant money this year for DPW claims, aging infrastructure, a couple significant sewer losses, and so that's where a lot of the money went. And then the rest of the money, the majority of it went to a civil rights case related to a challenged arrest by a BPS student. So that is how we got from last year's budget conversation to now. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Councilor Rodriguez?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Clarkson, when I first saw this, the first thing that kind of lit up my eyes were the $500,000 coming out of the snow removal, but I guess you said that we're okay with that. Do you have any idea what we have spent so far in snow removal this year?
I have the general lines here, but I got, thankfully, Budget Director Elvira Lopes is here. We can get that specific number for you, but that does come out of highway, purchase of services, Counselor, and thus far this year, that's for all purchase of services, but I can get specifically snow and ice, but we've spent about $500,000, and that's out of a $2 million, that's an all purchase of service for DPW. So that's 18% of the budget, 62% through the year. The snow and ice is a little over, between snow and removal and salt, is over $2 million. But I'll get that specific number for you, but those are the gross numbers out of that budget.
So with all the snow that actually has fallen in these so-called weekend storms that we've had, we've only spent $500,000?
That's correct.
Doesn't it cost about $100,000 per inch to remove snow?
So this report was as of last Friday, so it would not include any costs that were incurred in the last several days.
Okay.
But again, the total budget for both, because we have two different budget lines for snow removal and for the purchase of salt, and those numbers in total are over $2 million. And so Pat and I discussed this in detail this evening. And look, we can't predict. I remember back in 2015, right, in this community and just about every other one in Massachusetts, at the end of January, we said, boy, we haven't spent much in snow and ice. And then, 2015, we had, 100 inches of snow. But we're now at near the end of February, and I think we're both comfortable. And Pat has some very sophisticated weather prediction equipment for long-term predictions that we've purchased over the years with snow and ice money. So he's not just guessing that the weather's going to be good. It's his professional opinion. And I think based on spending trends, as you know, in the last several years, we've had large surpluses in this line every year other than 2015.
Well, that's one of the items that we are actually allowed to deficit spend if we had to, in case we get a major snowstorm. But I don't have any issues with the funds being requested for both the insurance or the judgment in the sense, but I just wanted to make sure that we take that out in places that we don't have to come back in another couple of weeks or so to say, well, we're going to move X, Y, and Z dollars from this account to pay for snow. So that's why, but if you're confident that we have enough in there to last us at least the snow season, I don't have a major problem with that.
And what I can do, Counselor, is give you, because we've looked at it. Again, the numbers are here in the budget report that I provided to you over the weekend, but what I can do, because we have this data, is to give you information before you vote finally next Monday on the trends and what we've actually spent, like, say, over the last 4 or 5 years, so that you can put this in perspective.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Farwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the DPW did a great job, Dr. Claxton, on most of the roadways. I am a little concerned with giving up this snow removal money because I can tell you the sidewalks were terrible. If we had school this week, and I don't know if my colleagues have looked around, the sidewalks are nothing but glare ice, and I would be very concerned if we had thousands of school children walking to school. So it may be that we've only expended $500,000, but I don't think we've really done too much sidewalk sanding and removal, so that's just a cautionary note. This question on property insurance is more for the auditor. When I see a $650,000 amount of money, there's two questions that come to mind based on the presentation. One, why wouldn't we know this back in June? Well, I mean, if we obviously know we have assets to insure, but why wouldn't we have known this and included it in the law department budget back then? That's the first question. The second question is more detailed. What are we paying the advisor? What compensation do we give to these people that shop for the best bargain? Because when I served as mayor, we were going to one insurance agent, and that person was doing all the fleet and liability insurance. And at the time, Mayor Mike Hogan of Marlborough said, go out to bid on it. There's nothing that prevents you from doing an RFP and finding out what insurance companies will underwrite whatever your needs may be. And if we're not doing that, I think that's too bad. So those two questions, why wouldn't we have known this back in June, and why, and what are we going to compensate this advisor for telling us where we can get the best deal?
So I can answer some of that, and certainly the solicitor can supplement those answers because we do work together on this. So when we come to you in June for the subsequent year's budget, these numbers are an estimate because it's before our renewal is scheduled and actually put into place. And the renewal is based on, particularly with the auto insurance, is based on actual claims. And here in Brockton, although our trend last year was positive for the first time, several years before that, our claims exceeded the amount that we paid for the coverage, meaning our losses were greater than 100%. Again, last year for the first time that trended positively, but it takes a few years for those numbers to even out. So we came to you with an estimate of what it would cost, but because of our claims history, when those numbers actually came out, they were higher than anticipated. Another issue is Brockton historically has significantly undervalued its buildings for purposes of insurance. And during my tenure here, we've gradually tried to move those up. And I understand it was a specific objective to try to save money to significantly undervalue the buildings. The problem, and the city of Taunton saw this in a very real way several years ago, is it's a risk, just like insurance is a risk. And if you undervalue your buildings, if you have a loss, then you wind up paying. And if you all remember the fire in the City Hall in Taunton a few years ago, they were significantly underinsured and had some real challenges in how to address that. So those two factors, I think, led to the increase. And again, we don't get the renewal until after the fiscal year has started. You are absolutely correct that insurance is exempt from Chapter 30B, from the Uniform Procurement Act here in Massachusetts. We have a carrier, Eastern Insurance, who actually, though, although we have not bid out their services, they do actually, and we can share the renewal documents that they review with Megan and me, because they actually go out and shop our insurance to different carriers. We were, because of our challenging claims experience, particularly with the auto insurance, almost to the point where we'd be in the general risk pool, which would have significantly increased those costs. But we did, Eastern was able to find us a company that would insure us. So it's that variety of factors that leads to the overall cost. I don't know off the top of my head. As part of our overall cost, their fee is embedded in there. It's explicit in the proposal that they provide us. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I will get it for you.
Okay, I'd like to know the fee. And the other question is, why can't we simply write our policies to go from July 1 to June 30th? I mean, it just, take your fleet insurance, take your liability insurance, take your insurance for buildings, and just say, okay, listen, as of FY '26, we want to know what it will be for the following insurance coverages from July 1st to June 30th, period, end of discussion. And I don't think that's unreasonable, because, and you and I talked earlier about some things that we'll address later on, but I just get a sense there's so many moving parts to this budget lately. There's just so many, well, we did this, but now we've really got to go back and do this. And we did this, but we should have done that. And it's no fault. I'm not suggesting that anyone is doing anything wrong. I guess I'm used to a little more stability, that when you start the fiscal year on July 1st, absent some extraordinary event or some sudden extra need that the city has, your budget is pretty much what it is. I mean, additional postage, yes, we can understand that. A couple of police cars get demolished, we can understand that. But I'd like to get back to, I think, a little more, and I'm just speaking for myself, a little more fiscal stability, because I just feel like there's all these moving parts and all these things that are going on in FinCom, you know, every couple of weeks, and it bothers me. So what is the deductible for our building? You know, a school building catches fire. Do we have a deductible?
We do. I think it's 5,000. I believe that certainly for the autos is 5,000. The deductible for buildings for damage, I believe it is as well, but I'm not certain. I don't want to give you a figure and then just not know it for sure.
You know what, for the benefit, you know, I'll certainly vote favorably on this, but for the benefit of all councilors, could you send something out between now and Monday when we vote on this?
Yeah,
Maybe the proposal that is
the renewal
now
proposal
in
from
place,
Eastern. Absolutely.
That should answer all of the questions and will let us know what's going on, so.
And to address council at a larger point, I think what I would suggest is the last couple of years in particular, as you know, the budgets that we've presented to you are significantly pared down over previous years because some of the challenges that we've had. So what I would suggest is it's not fiscal instability, but I think past budgets have provided us the flexibility because there were more funds available to deal with some of those changes. A budget is always a moving and a living document, but we've had, I think, greater financial flexibility within the budget in the past because we've just had more funds on hand to do that, to deal with some of those changes that occurred during the year. But because this is a very, very lean budget, we've got less flexibility to address some of those issues as they pop up.
All right, and I apologize, one last question. The property insurance, that covers all school buildings, the football stadium, everything?
Yeah, in fact, there's in that document that we'll provide you, there's a list that we go over that lists each building that's covered.
And equipment and all of that?
Yes.
All right, and I assume we Schedule 19 some of that to the schools?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor. Anyone else? Entertain a motion?
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second?
Motion is made and properly seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Matter is recommended favorably. Thank you, Dr. Clarkson.
Item 10, ordered that the following named sum be and the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Transfer of $268,000 from Parks and Recreation retained earnings to Parks and Recreation purchase of services, $160,000. Parks and Recreation goods and supplies, $68,000. Parks and Recreation park playground improvements, $15,000. Parks and Recreation summer playground improvements, $25,000. Invited Superintendent of Parks, Tim Carpenter. CFO, Dr. Troy Clarkson.
Dr. Clarkson.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce my new dance partner, Mr. Tim Carpenter. So when we came to you for the budget back in June, we recognized and discussed the fact that the budget for Parks and Recreation, because it has to be in balance, was leaner than we wanted it to be, and talked about the likely need to come back to you once the retained earnings were certified. So the certified retained earnings for this enterprise fund were $941,365. So there are more than sufficient funds, not only to address the needs in this year's budget, and Tim can talk to you about the specific needs, but also leaving funds for capital improvement should they be necessary, and sufficient funds should we need them to balance next year's budget. But I'll defer to Tim to talk operationally about the specific needs.
Mr. Superintendent, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Good evening, members of the council. I guess I feel like I'm eating a little bit of humble pie here tonight. So this is my 12th budget that I've created and maintained in my career here with the city. I guess 24 of them if you count the cemetery as well. This is the first time I've had to come before you for a supplemental budget request. As Dr. Clarkson mentioned, we were pretty lean on some of the cuts that we made and some of the cuts that I agreed to in preparation for this current fiscal year's budget, situations that we're all aware of. For example, Councilor Nicastro, I remember you specifically asking me about the gasoline line item, and it was exceedingly lean. If you will notice, none of this is for full-time salaries nor for overtime. This is really to pay bills. This is to pay for electricity. This is to pay for gasoline. This is to pay for natural gas to heat our buildings. This is for infield mix, fertilizer and pesticides for the golf course and the soccer fields, the ball fields. This is infield mix. This is play equipment that we haven't replaced with our park grants that we've just are wrapping up hopefully this spring. Engineered wood fiber to refresh under some of the existing play equipment. This is all bills that we need to pay. So it is not overtime. It's not an additional request for overtime. It's not an additional request for full-time salaries. This is to pay the bills to keep the lights on. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second.
Councilors, any questions? All right, a motion has been made and properly seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion is recommended favorably. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you, councilors. Item 11, resolved. Be it resolved by the Brockton City Council to invite Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer, Mayor Robert Sullivan, and Irene Giannopoulos, City Auditor, to appear before the Finance Committee to discuss and provide an update on the current status of the FY25 budget. Invited Honorable Mayor Robert F. Sullivan, CFO Dr. Troy Clarkson, City Auditor Irene Giannopoulos.
Dr. Clarkson.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and I am really very pleased to be here under this resolve, because I think, as I've discussed with the Council President, I think it's very useful to have this opportunity from time to time just to discuss the general state of affairs financially here in the city. So we have, as you know, for quite some time produced regular reports that I've begun sharing with you regularly that provide us an up-to-date spending analysis of each department, each line in each department. We then subsequently, in the wake of the school deficit, created a similar report for the schools, which we also provided to you. And one of the things that, that this spreadsheet does is it tracks exactly where we're at in the fiscal year, applies a percentage to that, and then tracks each category that you vote as part of the budget and compares where we're at to our target. So again, as of last week, as of February 13th, and I could have produced another report as of today, but I didn't want to be confusing and have a bunch of numbers out there. So these numbers are fairly recent, as of the 13th of February. We were 62.47% through the fiscal year. And then as you look at each of these departments' budgets, if there's any budget that exceeds that percentage or any line within the budget, then this spreadsheet lights up that cell in red to give us a warning that we're ahead of projected spending in that budget. Budget Director Elvira Lopes and I then on a monthly basis review this report, and we will sit down with departments that have those trends that are exceeding the amount, talk about whether or not they need money, and then come to you to move money around, or just implement some austerity measures to make sure that they meet the end of the year in a surplus. So as you look through the report that I provided to you on Friday, for instance, you'll see Parks and Recreation with several red cells and the Law Department with several red cells. It's because we were tracking those expenses that we then said, well, we need to come to the council and seek some additional funding for that. So that is really that report in action. I would call your attention to the overall numbers, because if you look at the overall city spending in the general fund, remember we're at 62.4% of the year. The overall spending is at 62.7% of the year. So on an overall basis, you'd look at it and say, well, we're slightly over where we should be. But let me give you a couple of examples of why that is, and why that we're still projecting actually a surplus overall at the end of the year. Because two major spending categories, when you look at particularly the Treasurer's debt service, our budget is $20.2 million, and we've spent $16.9. So we've spent 83% of the budget for debt service 62% of the year. The reason for that is that our debt service payments are front-loaded, and we pay most of them at the beginning of the fiscal year. So although that cell lights up red, it's not concerning, and as the year progresses, that number will come down. There's still a small amount in the debt service because there's some interest payments that have not been paid yet. But again, that overall amount is showing that we're much higher than we should be, but it's because we pay most of that at the beginning of the year. And in addition to that, you see that the HR benefits are a little higher than anticipated. That's because of the way that the health insurance trust is funded. So on an overall basis, when you look at each individual department, most of them are trending well below that 62.4%. I'll just, a couple of them, the mayor's office at 41%, the police department at 58%, which in a budget that large, 4% of spending, is a savings of a significant amount of money. So this report has become a tremendously useful tool to track our spending on a regular basis. And again, we created that with the schools and are providing that to you regularly. We also track the revenues. And some of those lag behind but we still get together. When I say that, I mean that, like someone asked tonight about the marijuana, Councilor Minicello asked about the marijuana revenue. And so that lags behind because that money is paid to the state and then they pay us on a quarterly basis. So it lags behind a little bit. In terms of our taxes, as you know, that's paid on a quarterly basis. So when we track the revenues, let me just give you a couple of for instances. Our tax levy collections are at 74%, so a little ahead of the year, but that's because how those are paid. The cherry sheet collections, which is the money we get from the Commonwealth, well, we're at 50% right now, but again, the state pays that a little behind, but certainly by the end of the year, we'll be at 100% on that. The local receipts right now are at 31%, but we know based on our regular collections and how those come in, we anticipate being well ahead of those projections at the end of the year. So we have these really useful tools that have been put in place. I wanted to highlight just a couple other things that you don't see in these reports that my office is doing. Under Elvira's leadership, we've created a tool even more sophisticated than this. As you know, all of our collective bargaining agreements are up on June 30th. So Elvira and her team, particularly financial analyst Megan McKee, have produced a very sophisticated projection tool. So as we enter into negotiations, we have a spreadsheet that calculates costs per employee and drills down to that specific level that talks about stipends and earning categories for every employee in the city, so that when we go to the table to negotiate, we can predict to the dollar what a specific proposal is going to cost in real time. And in austere times like this, that's a very, very valuable tool. So we're constantly looking at ways that we can use technology to improve our data and our information that's available to us to make good decisions when we come to you and ask about spending. So I've asked Elvira to be here because she's a critically important partner for me in all of this and leads a team of amazing analysts that really do some great work for us. So she's here if you have any specific questions. But I really wanted to talk to you about the advantages of this report, answer any specific questions you might have department by department, but then be available in general to talk about the process and what we go through during the fiscal year to ensure that we have the surpluses that we've enjoyed the last several years. I will say, and I said this to you, I think, at budget time last June, because of what we've needed to do in both our projections of revenues and the actual budgets that we bring to you for approval, I don't anticipate the kinds of surpluses this year and in subsequent years, at least for the next few years, that we've had in the last several years. And the reason for that is we've had to increase our revenue estimates, increase those local receipt estimates to address the school deficit and then to address our ongoing budget needs. And we've reduced the budget, the departmental budgets that we've brought to you. So on both ends, both the revenues that we've increased and the spending that we've decreased will result in surpluses not as significant as we've had in the past. But that was by necessity. And that relates a little bit to what I was speaking of a few minutes ago when I talked about the money that's available for flexibility within budgets to address the varying needs that occur every year. So I think that's a good overview of where we're at, both so far this fiscal year, but in general and how we approach monitoring the city's spending. So again, Elvira and/or I are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Clarkson. Councilor Farwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Clarkson and Elvira. As you know, I spoke with you earlier today, and you touched upon it briefly, and that was the collective bargaining agreements that are coming up. And I happened to pull some data out of budget books, which I thought was quite interesting, and that is for fiscal year 2021, personal services on page 62 of the budget book, $67,282,558. For FY25, we are 29.3% higher. There's an extra $19,705,075 being spent for personal services according to that budget book, according to those two budget books. And so that really makes me raise the issue that we don't know what any of the issues coming out of Washington will do with respect to tariffs. We don't know what will happen with the United States Department of Education, which provides funding for special education, disabled children, and obviously the city has got to take care of children who have special needs. Just assuming a 4.5% increase for collective bargaining agreements would require millions and millions of dollars more for the city to provide to different departments, teachers, police, fire, DPW. So I guess my first question to you, Dr. Clarkson, is that forecast model that you have, we've really got to watch things carefully because we have to be fair to employees, but we also have to be able to pay the bills. And any comments that you may have on that, I think we should take to heart because I worry. We're in the people business. I mean, we employ people to provide services to our residents, and that is costly. But I think we've reached a point where we've got to really be careful with our collective bargaining agreements because it's taking us down a road where millions and millions of dollars more are being required year after year.
That's an insightful question, Counselor, and thank you. And so one of the advantages of this sophisticated tool that we've developed is that it allows us, again, in real time to understand what the impacts are, not only of the negotiations that are about to commence, but what the financial implications are of the decisions we've already made. And if you remember, when we came to you and settling that last round of contracts, some of the unions elected, rather than percentage increases, elected to have a different structure of how pay steps were created. And so we, for some of the unions, created a longer series of pay increases through steps rather than cost of living allowances. And that allowed the employees over a longer period of time to understand what their pay increases would be. The impact of that, though, is that for many of those union contracts, significant increases are already in place starting July 1st of this year without any negotiations or cost of living allowances. In fact, that tool that I just spoke of, and I'm looking over my shoulder to make sure I get this figure right, but I'm pretty sure, because we already ran the numbers, and let's say what are our financial commitments right now as of today for next fiscal year based on what we've already negotiated, because although the contracts expire on June 30th, there are step systems in place for step increases that go into the next several fiscal years. And so those commitments alone will result in approximately $4 million in increases next year on July 1st. So I certainly fully intend when we have conversations with those unions to remind them that and not in all cases, but in some cases, for some of those unions, the increases that we've already negotiated will result in significant increases. And I think it's important to keep that in mind as we go to sit at the table and negotiate.
All right, the next issue that I wanted to just touch upon briefly is the letter from the DOR, and one of the requirements that Division of Local Services, Department of Revenue has is submission of submission with the balance sheet of the budget to actual revenue and expenditure reports from munis for both the school and the city. Now, as I understand it, two things. From TJ Plant, he's concerned that there might be invoices he indicated it keeps him awake at night, that there might be invoices laying around that could be $1 million because the school tracks them in a different system, I guess, than Munis. If I'm reading this letter correctly, it is absolutely essential, whether people like it or not, that we merge all of our financial transactions, revenues, expenditures, encumbrances into one system that gives us an accurate figure, because we can't be operating with the schools doing one thing and the city doing another. You won't have the right data, DOR won't have the right data, we won't have the right information to make the decisions that we need to make. So is that something that's in progress? Are we making progress?
The answer is yes to both of those questions. And so just to offer some clarification, although the letter from the Department of Revenue is dated today, it was reissued by Deb Wagner and her team today upon our request, because I wanted to make sure if you had any questions about the opioid money, you had it unfiltered from the DOR. But these requirements were actually from back in the fall after the close of last fiscal year. And so the requirements for the submission with the balance sheet, budget to actual revenue and expenditure reports from Munis for both the school and the city, that was as of the close of last fiscal year. We obviously provided those. All of this information was required to be submitted before they would set the tax rate, which they have done. So that was the tax rate that was set as a result of your tax classification hearing back in December. But I will address the specific issue of the invoices, and the answer is yes. Everything is tracked in Munis. What TJ spoke of, and as you know, he and I speak on a regular basis. We had an hour discussion just today talking about how open architects will help the city in developing a long-range 5-year budget plan that we can discuss at one of these resolve meetings, because we're really trying not to live from year to year as we've done the last few years, but to really do some long-range financial planning that we can bring to you and then hold to. But I think what TJ was addressing is invoices for services rendered that may be in different offices within the school department and have not yet been submitted to City Hall for payment. So that's something I know the new superintendent is working very hard on. She has a new member of her staff, Kim Tsai, who is working very hard on that. Kim Tsai and Irene meet on a weekly basis on Friday to discuss that particular issue and to make sure invoices are getting to the city to be paid. So you've heard, and some of you have sat in on those meetings between the schools and the city, and I can tell you it's not just lip service. The level of coordination and communication has improved vastly. So I think we have a much better sense today than we did, say, a year or two ago about the exact nature of their spending. We created these reports so that we can track the school spending like we track the city spending. So is it a perfect system? No, but is it vastly improved over what it was 2 years ago? I think the answer is yes.
Well, I think all of us recognize you're making a cultural or a behavioral change in the way things are done, and that takes time. All right, my last bit of information questioning tonight deals with enterprise funds, because whenever the residents hear enterprise funds, they think of water rate increases, sewer rate. I took a look at Chapter 44, Section 53F and a half of the general laws, which allows a city or town to set up an enterprise account for cable television, for water, healthcare, recreational, transportation. And one of the interesting provisions, if I'm reading this correctly, and you and Elvira will know, no later than 120 days prior to the beginning of each fiscal year, an estimate of the income for the ensuing fiscal year and a proposed line item budget of the enterprise shall be submitted to the mayor, Board of Selectmen, or other executive authority of the city of town by the appropriate local entity responsible for operations of the enterprise, provided that for a school transportation service, the appropriate local entity shall be the school committee. said board, mayor, or other executive authority shall submit its recommendation to the town meeting, town council, or city council, as the case may be, which shall act upon the budget in the same manner as all other budgets. If I'm reading this right, by March 2nd, you and the mayor should be getting data on all of the different enterprise accounts we have, your forecasted revenue coming in for FY26, and we should at least have some type of a snapshot as to where we are. If I've read this correctly, my only question to you is, will you please share that information with us on all the different enterprise accounts? Water, sewer, refuse, stormwater, recreational, parks and recreation, because it's important to have that information ahead of time. If you forecast significant deficits, then obviously I'll be worried. If you forecast that we're pretty much breaking even, that'll be fine. And the last thing I would say is we transferred $3.2 million out of retained earnings in the water enterprise account recently for a new water main construction account. Retained earnings is excess revenue brought in plus the earnings derived from the interest that's gained on those. Is that correct?
Yes, and one other thing. It's the excess revenues. It's the enterprise version of free cash. It's also budgeted funds that were approved but not expended in the previous year.
Okay.
Those are the two main ones. Any interest income is also part of that, but those two main categories are what makes up the retained earnings. And for the water, you're right, we did, because there was a necessity to construct some new water mains, ask you for a little over $3 million. The good news is the water enterprise last year generated $12 million in retained earnings. So we still have nearly $9 million available for additional capital items or to balance next year's budget. The long-term goal is, and should be, to not use retained earnings to balance the budget. They should be purely for capital expenditures and one-time unforeseen expenses. Unfortunately, the fee structure here has not been such that we've been able to do that. So you did, last year, approve sewer and refuse increases so that those enterprises could become self-sufficient. Unfortunately, if those enterprises are not self-sufficient, the general fund has to make up the difference. And so we strive to have enterprises that are self-sufficient. The challenging part of that is, obviously, the way you do that is by keeping the fees sufficient to meet the expenses. And so it really is a mix of making sure those expenses stay low and we have sufficient fee increases to meet the needs. And I understand certainly that the solution is not always to increase the fees. And so we constantly look for ways to keep those expenses down in those enterprises to minimize the need to come to you and seek fee increases.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Minichiello.
Just to follow up, Mr. CFO, so I heard you loud and clear that there's a lag with respect to the state and the dispensary revenues. But can you, with any confidence, I guess, let us know if your projections that we based this year's budget on seem to be coming true?
The answer is yes, and I can get you, so the revenue report that we provided you gives overall categories, but we have a more detailed report that breaks it down by every category, including the marijuana revenue. So what I'll do is I'll provide you that more detailed report tomorrow that gives you that breakdown. But in all of the last, let's say, 3 years, we have exceeded our projections for marijuana revenue.
So I guess that's my question. Do you see that trend continuing or for next year's budget, or you just don't want to, or you're not in a position to say at this point?
So one of the things we do around this time of year is we actually meet with all of the department heads. For instance, we sat down with Jim Plouffe just last week. We looked at this year's projections for building permits, talked about trends in the industry, talked about the economy, and we're actually, you'll see for next year's budget, we're going to reduce that amount of building permit revenue by a couple of $100,000 because we don't just take the number and plop on a percentage increase. We really drill into that level of detail. So we haven't taken a look at next year's numbers for marijuana revenue yet, but what we will do is sit down, look at all of the revenue from the dispensaries, take a look at, your question is timely because I learned just this weekend, because this is not a Monday to Friday job, that there are a couple of dispensaries, I guess, that were purchased by another vendor in town, and so I don't know what that means for the future of revenue from those dispensaries. But those are the kind of things we'll look at in projecting next year's numbers. But what I'll provide to you is our target for this year and where we're at this point in the fiscal year.
Thank you. And are all of the licenses being utilized, or are there any licenses that have been created that are not in play just yet or out there operating?
That I do not know. We obviously handle the revenue, but the permitting generally is coordinated both through the mayor's office and the law department. I believe the answer to the question is yes, but I'll get that for you as well.
And with regard to the hotel, motel taxes, how do those look for this year and next year? Are we, I guess, on target, so to speak?
We are definitely on target. Those local receipts were some of the ones that we increased. If you remember, we increased the local receipt estimates by more than $10 million to satisfy the school deficit. That's because we always had projected them so low, but we increased them in an amount that was still responsible, that we could attain and exceed the overall amount. So we are on track for this year. But I'm making a note for myself. Again, we'll give you the report that drills down to the detail in each category so you can see exactly where we're at so far this year.
Thank you very much. I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Clarkson.
I am listening. I was just checking the specific, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
So this is as of the last time this report was produced. The meals were projected at $1,500,000. We're at $424,000. Rooms tax, we're at $600,000. We're at $276,000. So just about a 50% and about 30% on the other. But again, those lag behind. So at this point in the year, that's not a cause for concern because the state pays a quarter in arrears, and so every year those estimates have been exceeded, and I anticipate they will. But we'll give that detailed report to you tomorrow. Thank you, Elvira.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Counselor.
And staying with marijuana, several years ago when we set up those accounts, remember there was some destinations of some of those funds that we were going to destine, a percentage of this to the police department, something to the fire, something to Parks and Rec, something for Council on Aging. You recall that, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know if thus far those funds have actually been given to those specific departments as we intended from the setting up of the account?
I would say yes. So I think that was something that you and I worked on together when you were mayor.
Right.
And from an accounting perspective, the way we've transacted that is that all of those departments that were identified in that order that was passed by the council are supported by the overall budget. And so the amounts that are expended by all those departments well exceeds the amount of marijuana revenue we have. So we have not, for instance, budgeted a particular amount of marijuana revenue, say for the police department, but we use the marijuana money in total to support the entirety of the budget, which encompasses all of those uses that were described in the council's order.
Yeah, but I think the intention was that it needed to be specifically on the budget so that they understand that $10,000 is coming to a specific department from the marijuana revenues, because I think that's the intent. It was not to augment the overall budget of the department, because it's supposed to specifically state that, you know, this new playground was designed with funds that came specifically from the marijuana funds. And I don't think that's actually happening. I think what you're doing is throwing that money into the pot that goes to recreation, and then they use that as part of their overall budget. But it's not specifically going into those departments for those specific causes that we actually had determined.
You're absolutely correct. Again, the actual accounting is much broader. However, we certainly can do that. If we take a look at all of the marijuana funds that come in a given year, given the detail that we have in that budget book, we certainly, for next year's budget, can take that amount and look at the council order and draw a direct line between the amount that's coming in and what we're supporting in those budgets.
Yeah, because I can't speak for anybody else in here, but I can speak for myself. And I think Councilor Fowell and a couple other councilors, they're not here anymore. We were part of that set-up committee. From the very get-go, we were called all kinds of names because we were not hurrying the thing up to get the, you know, that ordinance in the books and do it the right way, in the sense where it wouldn't come back and bite us. I think it's important for us to go back, as we had promised the residents and the taxpayers of this community, that look, this is a good thing for the community. We set it up this way because look on this particular, let me just use the Council on Aging, for instance. Because of the marijuana funds, you know, $50,000 came into the Council on Aging for the council to use for whatever reasons they wanted to use it. You know, it could be to buy new furniture. It could be for buying a new table for here, a new table. But at least you know that specifically into those departments, those funds came in. And I think it kind of justifies the work that we actually did to specifically say, listen, we want you to bite the bullet and sign off on this particular marijuana venture because it will kind of produce dividends back into these specific departments. I think it's important that when we're setting up the budget, that there's something specific in there, not necessarily because with all due respect, some departments were not included in that. We had some specific departments that we wanted to do that, and I think it would make sense to have that specifically state from marijuana receipts, you're getting this.
Sure, yeah.
And not to use that as a cutting tool, you know, you need to cut 10% of your budget. Well, cut it somewhere else, but not necessarily from these particular funds, because that came in specifically for the benefits of those departments.
Understood. That's something we can clearly do and include that information in next year's budget.
And what about the communications back to the states? Is the state not asking the communities exactly what they're using those funds for, or are they just assuming that it's going to be thrown into a pot to help the overall budgeting of the city?
Well, so that's a really good question, because unlike the opioid funds, which are, as we talked about a little earlier, in a separate revolving fund, the marijuana funds come in as general revenue and are not accounted for in a separate fund. So we report them to the Commonwealth as we do all of the other revenue sources, but not the uses of the funds, just the receipt of them.
So they don't ask you exactly where those funds went and for what purpose? They just...
We report as, again, as a general revenue source for the overall budget. We certainly report to them how the funds are expended, but we don't report providing a direct line as you're suggesting that the money went for these specific purposes.
Okay, so we're okay with the state as far as the reporting
Yes.
concept is. And hopefully this year we'll see something that specifically aligns with at least with the intentions of the council back when we set those things up.
Yeah, I think what would be good, and you and I can talk in more detail before we put the actual budget book together, but I think we can actually provide a copy of the council order that was passed several years ago, and then conduct that exercise to demonstrate where specifically, how much money came in and how it's being allocated and for what.
I'd appreciate that, because I think it's important for us to communicate with the folks at home so that they understand exactly what these dollars that are coming in are being put to use in this community. Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Razak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. CFO. A while back, months back, I had asked about the marijuana revenue that was, was coming into the city, but I was told, as you just stated, that it goes straight, it's collected by the state and then it's dispersed to the city. So how are we, who's doing the checks and, I guess, balance to make sure that we're getting, because we're supposed to be getting the total sales of these different businesses, correct?
So when
A percentage of their total sales?
When the marijuana program began, there were a couple of different sources of revenue. And I'll speak generally about my knowledge in Massachusetts. Communities generally handled it similar to the way Brockton did. And there were two revenue sources. One was the marijuana tax that's actually paid to the Commonwealth. And then the Commonwealth processes that and then pays us. And that's what I was discussing tonight. And that's why I said it gets paid to us in arrears, because the vendors pay it to the Commonwealth. Takes them a while to process it. And then I believe on a quarterly basis, they provide the revenue to us. In many communities, including Brockton, there was a second category of revenue based on those host community agreements.
Correct.
Some of the marijuana vendors in the Commonwealth challenged the ability of municipalities to charge under those host community agreements. And through the legal process, it was determined, and let me be crystal clear, this was not just the city of Brockton. This was, not all communities have marijuana, but I believe overwhelming majority of those that did negotiated host community fee agreements in which they received revenue. So those were determined to not be allowed to charge those extra fees. And so that second category of revenue no longer exists for us.
No longer exists at all?
We are still collecting some of those funds.
So is it, when you say some of those funds, is it from some of the businesses, or just some of the businesses are paying, others aren't? Is that pretty much what?
I believe that's the case, yeah. And,
okay. And how do we find out as a community? Because when we sat here and we worked on the ordinance, and we worked on distributing the licenses, a lot of it was, we really weren't in, I guess, the marijuana business, but the reason we supported it, a lot of us did, was because it was going to benefit the city. And now to hear that some of these businesses aren't complying with what, I understand the legality of it, but I'm just, it kind of, irks me a little bit, like that, where we did all that, and then I didn't know that this had happened until I reached out to you and the law department, back in the last year, and I was a little astonished to find out that we really don't know what businesses in the city that opened, that nobody's following up to see how much each business is contributing to the cities.
I wouldn't say that. I think that the issue is all of them, every business that's licensed to sell marijuana in the city of Brockton is paying the marijuana tax to the Commonwealth.
The tax, that's to the Commonwealth, correct.
And that's the money that we predict as part of our budget. we track all of the revenue, and in fact, we separately track the marijuana tax from those, from the other revenue that comes in through the host community fees. We, I believe wisely, in this year's budget, did not project any funds from the host community fee revenue because we wanted to only have revenue predicted from certain sources. And so what's in your budget book for revenue for this year is strictly the marijuana tax. But we do track and have information, which I can provide to you, on the other marijuana revenue sources and how much we've taken in.
Okay, I would like that information, and if it's possible, I'd like to know which businesses are paying the host, that are paying what the host agreement said that they would pay. If that's possible, I'd like to see that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor. Anyone else?
Motion to recommend favor.
On the second. We got to get second, okay, on the motion.
On the motion, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Clarkson. Mr. Clarkson, going through the information you provided to us, and specifically the school expenses, I don't think anyone is surprised, especially after we recently approved more funding for the non-net school spending, that there are line items in the school's expenses that are over where they should be, 60-some percent. Bus drivers, 141%. Part-time employees, 98%. Temporary seasonal, 113%. Security guards, 86.8%. Transportation for the homeless, 82% and more. What are the schools doing to address this?
So I'll answer that in a couple of ways. First, when the $6 million that was placed in stabilization specifically to address non-net school spending costs is applied to this budget, you obviously will see all of these percentages change significantly. Mm-hmm. And so the next time we provide this report to you, because as I've discussed with the council president, we produce these on a monthly basis, and whether or not we have a resolve, I will provide them to the council on that monthly basis, so you'll be able to track them along with us each month. And so I anticipate the next time you see one of these percentages will be changed. But we have regular transportation roundtable meetings with the superintendent and her team to talk about this. Councilor Rodriguez was on them when he was council president, and Councilor Thompson is joining them now. The schools are doing several things to address those. They are looking at, and I am by no means a transportation expert, so let me pre-qualify my answer by saying that some of the jargon I use may not be entirely accurate, but I do attend those meetings and listen. And so they're looking at the routes that they use to pick up students and whether or not some of those can be changed to be more efficient and to try to capture a greater number of students. They are, I think, have conducted a transportation audit by a professional consultant who is advising them on ways that they can reduce costs. I know, as you all may remember, I attended a school committee meeting back in March, almost a year ago, March of last year, and highlighted some of my concerns related to school transportation. At that meeting, the schools discussed issuing, putting out a bid, seeking bids to see if a return to some form of a contracted model would be more economical. I know that's something that they're looking at. So we're working very closely with them to try to look at a whole variety of options because this is a significant cost center. I'm thinking of a couple of other things, so I'll offer them to you. One of the significant things they have done is, if you remember that presentation I made last March to the school committee, I offered a significant concern that the contracts for the special ed transportation were without a defined fee. They have revised, I believe, all of those, and so those individual transportation contracts have a defined fee structure in them. So they have taken significant steps, but it is still an area, I think, that needs additional work to bring some of those costs down.
Because we see it coming, the deficiencies. Even with the $6 million, I guess they expect they're going to need more money than that, an additional $5 million?
So that number is, that $5 million number certainly has been discussed. It is by no means certain. And what we have advocated for, we being the mayor and me and others, is to look very closely at other funding sources, including some state funds, including circuit breaker funds that can specifically be used for transportation and special needs transportation. So we are tracking the funds very closely on a regular basis, and as we get closer to June 30th, we will have more information, and again, I'll share it with you so that there will be no surprises this year, and we will know what those costs will be.
I hope so. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Anyone else? All right, a motion's been made. It's been properly seconded. All in favor? All opposed? Motion's recommended favorably. Thank you for your time tonight, Dr. Clarkson, and yours as well, Ms. Lopes.
Item 12, resolved, be it resolved by the Brockton City Council to invite Brenda Perez, Chief of Police or her designee, to appear before the Finance Committee to discuss the Brockton Police Department's strategy and planning for enforcement and implementation of the ordinance prohibiting camping on public property and the ordinance prohibiting loitering in public places. Invited Chief Brenda Perez and or her designee.
Councilor Lally.
Mr. Chairman, the chief has reached out and said that she's unable to make it this evening. I'd like to make a motion to postpone this item to the to the Finance Committee meeting on March 4th.
Second.
Motion's been made and properly seconded to postpone this matter until March 4th. All in favor? Anyone opposed? The motion carries. This matter will be postponed till March 4th.
That's all I have.
There's nothing before the council. Councilor's recognition. Councilor Lally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to announce that there will be an Accounts Committee meeting this Thursday at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Accounts this Thursday, 6 p.m. Anyone else?
Yes.
Oh, Councilor Nicastro.
Thank you. I'm just reflecting on the snowstorm that we just encountered in the last couple of days. And speaking with Commissioner Hill, I had a lot of issues in Ward 4 that had to do with once the snow emergency was declared, cars were supposed to be removed from the street and they were not. And it really impeded the ability of the DPW's contract vendors to plow the streets adequately. And we're seeing all you have to do is drive around the area to see the results of that, since in many instances the snow remained on the street around vehicles that weren't moved, and now they're just everywhere, these areas of icy snow. And so what I wanted to say is we're expecting another storm later this week, I think, and certainly it's only February. We will have more storms more than likely. Will everyone please, when a snow emergency is declared, be sure to remove your cars from the street. Makes it so much easier for us to get our streets clean. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Seeing no more councilor recognition and no more business before this committee, I make a motion to adjourn.